That's what the government sees our education system as an institution, as a business that's about making profits, that's about churning out students, that'll put money into the economy. It's not about providing a vital service that students deserve. And so they've cut $2 billion from higher education. This will mean that it'll make university more expensive. This will mean a 25% fee increase for students. And why should we stand for this? Why should we stand for this when the government has cut the corporate tax rate? Why are corporations being handed out all this money while students are plunged into further debt? The government is doing nothing to account for the needs of students, of working class people, of poor people, of disabled people, of indigenous people. While it props up the rich, it props up big business, it props up the corporations. That's bullshit. If you think education is a human right, if you think education should not be a corporation about profits, come to the protest outside Fisher Library today at 1 p.m.
Good on everyone for coming. We're here to protest against the Liberals' attacks on education that have been announced in the budget that just came out last week. So I'm Gene Brownlee, I'm the State Education Officer for the National Union of Students, and Ashlyn is going to be co-chairing with me. Ashlyn's the Education Officer at UNSW. So as we all should know, a whole bunch of education attacks have been announced by the Liberals, continuing their 2014 plans. But we'll start off with a Welcome Country by Georgia. Georgia's a student activist here at USYD, and a fighter for Indigenous rights and student rights. So here she goes.
I would like you all to join me in acknowledging that we are currently on the stolen land of the Gadigal people. We are gathered today on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to remind you all that this nation was never ceded, and in everything we do, we should be remembering the fact that we are on stolen land. It's a privilege to be able to gather here in protest and to have our voices heard, but I'd like to remind everyone that there are still voices that are going unheard. The voices of Indigenous people locked away in prisons, the voices of Indigenous people who are killed while they're in incarceration, and the voices of Indigenous children who are constantly and continually being stolen from their homes at a rate higher than ever before seen. I would like to acknowledge Indigenous women who suffer the highest rates of domestic violence and assault in this country. I would like to acknowledge Indigenous men who suffer the highest rates of suicide in this country. And I would like to acknowledge the elders and leaders who have gone before me, who made it possible for me to stand here and have my voice heard. I'd like to thank them, and I would like to thank my ancestors who came before me. And I would like to thank you all for gathering here, and I hope that you can respect the fact that this is and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you.
Always was, always will be. Always was, always will be.
Aboriginal land.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgia. Just before I go on, I just would like to tell everyone here that we did actually have a little run-in with Malcolm Turnbull at Central. He didn't really want to give us the time of day, but we did chase after him and give him a little bit of what for, so he is hearing us. I'd now like to welcome Doug Cameron. So Doug Cameron is a federal senator and also former National Secretary of the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, very close to my heart. So please make Doug feel welcome.
Well, thank you. First of all, could I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Thanks for coming along, and thanks Ashlyn and Jean for bringing us all together here, because this is one of the most important elections we are going to have for many, many years. It's not only important for education, You know how important that is. I'll go through some of the education issues, but you know them well. But it's also important about ensuring that Australia continues to be an egalitarian society, not one where the richest in the country get richer and the poorest in the country are expected to feed off the drip-down effect of that wealth at the high end. It's just not on. I just think it's totally unacceptable that we could have a Prime Minister who is so out of touch that he could tell people that you can just shell out to buy a house for your kids. Well, I was a tradesman, I was a union official, and I can tell you now, I could never ever afford to shell out to buy my two girls a house when they were both at university. That would have been absolutely unthinkable. So if you've got that type of wealth, good luck to you. But don't start telling everyone else in the country that you should be able to behave the same way as the richest people in the country, because it demonstrates how out of touch Malcolm Turnbull and his cabinet is. Absolutely out of touch. And on education, $200 million cuts over 4 years. That's in the budget. And I think that'll be the minimum cuts that you'll see. $100,000 university degrees. Now, what does that mean for young people coming out of university? It means you leave university in debt. It means that if you do end up trying to establish a home, you're in there battling against people using negative gearing and capital gains tax support to try and get a roof over your head. So you are behind the 8 ball right away, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well educated you are. If you're out there and you're battling on your own, it's going to be almost impossible to make your way under $100,000 degrees and a system that looks after the big end of town and the richest people in town to gain access to housing before people that actually need it. What we really should be talking is not about housing, but about homes, because it's about people's homes. This housing investment splurge by this government is just putting more and more people into a disadvantaged situation and making it tougher for you. Another area that's very bad that we should also understand is that this government wants to go back, really deep in their heart, they want to go back to work choices. They want to ensure that workers go there with no penalty rates, no decent conditions, and absolutely under the control of the boss. And I fought that all my adult working life, trying to stand up for workers, and if workers are individualised, if workers can't effectively and collectively bargain, then that means the inequality in this country diminishes. And that's why I fought hard against the ABCC, against the industrial approach that this government wants to take. Now, when we were last in government, we put an extra 190,000 students into university. Labour provided the support for 190,000 students to go in. An extra 26,000 Indigenous students. An extra 30% of regional students. And an extra 36,000 students from low-income homes. We increased from 2007 to 2014. Investment in universities went from $8 billion to $14 billion. We see university spending as an investment, not a cost. It's an investment in every individual here. It's an investment in your future. It's an investment in a good society. And thirdly, it's an investment in the economy. And I just think the economy should be serving society, not the other way around. And what we do and what we have by giving low-income students access to a good education is to make sure all the profits, all the wealth doesn't stay up the top, and we actually get wealth through the rest of the country. That's the important thing for us, and that's what we will do. I don't have a lot of time, but I'll finish up on this. That we've got a range of issues that Labour will be campaigning on. We will campaign strongly on a good society, on a decent society, on a fair society, We will campaign on Medicare, that the coalition will privatise Medicare. They're already starting to privatise the Medicare payment system. They cannot deliver on providing students their youth allowance, an absolute disaster recently. We will make sure that schools are funded under Gonski, that the universities are funded under our higher education changes. We'll fight for penalty rates. We'll have positive policies in every area. And somebody did say refugees. We will make sure that refugees are treated in a humane, humanitarian way. Thanks very much, everyone.
Bring them here.
Bring them here. Bring them here. Bring them here.
No cuts, no fees, no corporate universities, no cuts, no fees.
No corporate universities.
No cuts, no fees.
No corporate universities.
Okay, so thank you very much, Doug. Up next we have Sarah Gregson from the NTEU. She is the president of the NTEU at UNSW, and she's been a very great ally to the education collective at UNSW and has helped us out a lot and is just a real ally in the student movement. So come on up here, Sarah.
Hi everybody, and thanks for inviting me to speak to this rally. Oh. You'd think after all these years I'd know how to use a microphone, wouldn't you? First I'd like to start by thanking the Gadigal people for having us here on their land. If there are any Indigenous people other than Georgia here, thanks for having us, and we acknowledge that your land was never ceded. Sorry for the ugly buildings that we put on it. I want to start by congratulating students and NTU members around the country who've taken it up to Turnbull every time he's tried to talk about deregulations. All the rallies, the protests, the petitions and so forth, I think have been a wonderful success, because they don't want to mention the D word at the moment, do they? They're going very quiet on deregulation because they know that that's going to put higher education out of the reach of many working families, and they want those votes. They know they can't get elected if they have to admit that their plan is to cordon off higher education, to go back to what it was like when I was your age, that education was something that only the rich tossers got to do, the rugger buggers, the kids from the private schools, that was their preserve. We didn't aim to go to university. They want to go back to that kind of system. They act like education is a big drain on the purse, that all universities do is put their hand out and ask for more money and don't ever give anything back. Well, I think everybody knows that that's absolute crap. Even people who don't want to go to university want to make damn sure their kids do. They want to make damn sure that there are people there learning how to be the chemists and the vets and the nurses and the engineers and the climate scientists of the future. I mean, how on earth are we going to save the damage that's been done to the climate already if we don't have university experts learning how to fix up the mess? Where is the cure for cancer going to come from if it's not for universities? They think they're going to do it on the smell of an oily rag. Well, it's just not possible. They say they don't want a class war. But what is education for only the privileged few if it's not class war? What a work for the dole schemes if they're not class war? A whole bunch of people giving free labour to rich companies. What are attacks on Sunday penalty rates if they're not class war? They want students who are getting their education not to be able to earn enough to feed themselves during the week. They're trying to be sneaky, I think. They're trying to go quiet on their plans through this campaign, but I think they're just regrouping. They're going to try and pretend that they have listened, that their education policy is much more benign. We had an NTU expert in the budget lockup. It took him quite a few hours to find the education policy. So far was it buried down. They don't want to talk about it at the moment. They want to pretend like a $4 billion cut is now only a $2.5 billion cut, and we should all be happy about that. Sort of like when you stop banging your head against a brick wall, it feels a bit better. That collapsing 3 streams of Indigenous funding into one and giving the VCs the keys and the discretion to decide how it's spent is going to be better for Aboriginal students. when really we all know that that's going to mean cuts to services. That their so-called flagship courses are really going to be a Trojan horse for the complete deregulation of fees on every course not too far in the future. So really I think their slogan is just try and get through to July 2, which is not very inspiring really, is it? They just want to keep quiet until and hope that we won't notice. Cynically trying to pretend that they're the friend of victims of domestic violence while they cut all the legal services funding that those women and children so desperately need. Pretending to care about lives when they persecute refugees, some to the point of suicide. Protecting the big banks from scrutiny while a company like ComInsure can cynically deny claims to their customers, hoping that they'll die before they're able to get the money. Giving tax cuts to the rich while they've got their shonky offshore Panamanian accounts, while the real people, the hero on Q&A the other night who said a milkshake and a sandwich, well that's a family dinner in my neck of the woods. What would you understand about that? We can't let them get away with it. We've got whoever wins the election, we have to build on the anger that's all around us about all these sleights of hand and shonkiness and trying to make us pay for the system that they want. We've got to demand education for everybody who wants it, and the cuts to TAFE are just as dramatic as the cuts to university. And we have to tell Turnbull, and I'm afraid Bill Shorten as well, that we won't stand for anything less than free education for all.
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
Cut back!
Fight back!
Cut back!
Fight back!
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
They say cut back!
We say fight back!
Cut back!
Fight back!
Cut back!
Fight back!
Woo!
Awesome. Thanks heaps for that, Sarah. So, yeah, Sarah mentioned some of the other attacks that they're making in the budget. There was a bit of a mention of the $240 million they're cutting to emergency relief for women and children leaving abusive households. Shame. There's $200 million in cuts to the public dental scheme, $150 million in cuts to homelessness services. All the while, there's over $89 billion set to go extra to go to the military. They're cutting corporate tax down to 25% from 30%. It's an absolute disgrace. They say that they don't have all this money for these essential services by constantly giving more to the rich. So next up, our next speaker is Liam Carrigan. Liam's an education activist here at USYD. He's the education officer here. He's been involved in the struggle for education and for student rights for years now, and yeah, here he is.
Alright, before I speak, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Comrades, we stand here together today as activists, unionists, students, staff of all genders, races and political persuasions. But we all stand here because as a community, we are opposed to the direction our country is heading in. Irrespective of any differences, we stand against the horrific attacks on education, healthcare, student welfare, unions and workers that this government is inflicting and celebrating. So anyone I handed a flower out to earlier, come lay it on the grave of an egalitarian Australia. Again, we see an austerity budget that if enacted will destroy any semblance of equality and fairness in Australia. Again, higher education is under attack. Again, we must take to the streets to defeat it. As students, we hold incredible power. As an activist, I have been inspired by our wins, fighting cuts, standing in solidarity with staff on picket lines, and amassing in our thousands to beat back deregulation again and again. We will never stop fighting, and we will be back here time and time again. It would be impossible for me to represent the views and diversities of every student in this short speech. So instead, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the student movement. For all our flaws and the contempt we are shown by government, we have unimaginable power, and we will be responsible for dealing with the messes our forebears have made. That includes opposing this fucking joke of a budget. Morrison, Birmingham and Turnbull, watch your back and game on, moles. You knew you couldn't include deregulation because of community concern. That concern was our movement taking to the streets, chasing scum off you like our campuses, and building student demonstrations so goddamn loud you couldn't ignore us. However, comrades, we have won the battle, but we have not won the war. This budget screams evasion, delays, and shelving the most horrific of attacks until the election is passed. And even after this election, no matter who wins, this budget proposes $2 billion in cuts. And it took students taking to the streets when the Labor Party proposed the same cuts to make them drop that policy. So students will have to keep fighting no matter what. And these $2 billion of cuts will destroy a sector starved of funding so badly that a suite of corporate restructures across this country is now the norm. Here in New South Wales, we have the USYD restructure, which will see faculty slashed, jobs cut and degrees destroyed in the pursuit of a neoliberal university. At UTS, we have seen the implementation of balanced semesters, which has slashed course content and eroded staff conditions in order to maximise efficiency. UNSW, their management have proposed a strategic plan that includes trimesters and a shift to online learning. Management want to partner with corporations, industry and multinational donors who are apparently the future of higher education in this country, but will lead us with a hollow corporate education system. The realities call for more funding for higher education, not less. Students reject this budget. We reject the deregulation of flagship courses, which will see a slow march to those dreaded 100k degrees. We reject our financial contribution to our degrees being raised from 40% to 50% because fuck slacking us with more debt for the rest of our living lives. And scrap that, they'll probably decide to collect that sweet HECS dollar from our cold dead hands. Education is a social good, so why do the ruling classes think we deserve to pay? The money is there. The budget has included a 25% tax break to big businesses, $32 billion in defence spending, and $1.2 billion to maintain offshore processing centres that murder refugees. The young refugees who were forced to self-immolate were our age, and in another better world could have been students. We stand with them. Our fight, it's a long one, with no end in sight. I call upon Australia to hear the cries of students, to see education as a process and not as a commodity. Education changes lives. It should be free, so that the refugee girl coming to this country for the first time can succeed in the so-called lucky country. Or so the Indigenous boy from a remote community can access the tools he needs to lead his people. When we march today to UTS, let's be loud, let's be proud, and let's remember that education is a right and it's not a privilege. Thank you!
Simon says cut back!
We say fight back!
Simon says cut back!
We say fight back!
Cut back!
Fight back!
Make the corporations pay!
Budget cuts, no way!
Make the corporations pay! Budget cuts!
No way!
Make the corporations pay!
We're gonna beat back! Troubles attack!
We're gonna beat back on Trump's attack!
We're gonna beat
Back! Troubles attack!
We're gonna beat back on Trump's attack!
We're gonna beat back on Trump's attack! Money for health and education!
Not the corporate tax evasion!
Money for health and education!
Not the corporate tax evasion!
Before I speak, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land UTS stands on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student or person here with us today who are against the $2 billion worth of cuts to higher education proposed by the Liberal government. Today we are here to fight for our right to a fair education. But for Indigenous students in Australia, this means something entirely different. Indigenous students are seeing some of the most brutal cuts to Indigenous higher education schemes. These schemes include the Indigenous Tutorial Access Scheme, the Indigenous Support Program and the Commonwealth Scholarship Program, all schemes which will be cut by the budget proposed by the Liberal government last week. These programs are a necessity and a right. Indigenous students need them to fight against the already huge underrepresentation of Indigenous students in higher education.
With only 1 in 100 research students being Indigenous, these cuts will see that shocking statistic fall and could likely mean that we see no representation at all in Australia's research. Room retention rates already exist among Indigenous students. Getting rid of schemes like ITAS and support programs means that we will see numbers getting worse rather than better like it has in the past. Not only does this mean Indigenous students will have less of a chance in obtaining a higher education, it also means tutors and academics who have found jobs through these schemes will lose their jobs in an already underpaid and competitive industry. Graduate student and US ATSE officer Lizzie Green has worked hard in fighting to ensure programs such as ITAS are not cut. Although she has not been able to make it with us today, she has asked me that everyone here to know that the higher education support program are there for Indigenous students having a rough time at uni, and are used so Indigenous students from rural areas have someone to talk to. Why would you try to cut something that's already proved to have a good effect on students? And from what Lizzie Green has said, it is quite obvious how the Liberal government feels about Indigenous students and how truly out of touch they are. To end my speech, I call on non-Indigenous Australians to support Indigenous solidarity and keep in mind that these possible cuts mean not for just UTS and for our universities, but for Indigenous students across Australia. We are suffering and fighting a culture of genocide and dispossession, which now extends to universities and our right to education, and we won't stand for these cuts at all. Thank you.
Thanks heaps for that, Enoch. So our last speaker today is Sylvie Ellsmore. She's a Greens councillor in Marrickville here in Sydney. And yeah, she's also a native title lawyer, has fought back against HECS as a student unionist, and has recently been fighting for equal access to education and affordable housing in the inner west. So, yeah.
Hello, thanks everyone. Can you hear me? Who can hear me? Yeah? That's a thumbs up. Fuck, is everyone alright? Yeah, good. That's a bit rough. It's not a police state yet, we hope, so thank you for turning out, and thank you for dealing with such dignity, with such aggression from the police today. On all of you who came tonight to turn back in today. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Greens. I send my apologies for our wonderful Senator Lee Rhiannon, who's been a great champion for free education. To remind you once again, obviously the Greens stand with you, that education is a right, not a privilege, and we are with you in this campaign against education cuts and for genuinely free higher education. And it's important to remember, I went to uni 15 years ago, I went to Sydney Uni, and I remember that moment when we had a Conservative government, the Howard government, when they first put fees up by 40%. That was the moment where, I was a law student, when my rent was a third that it is now in my share house, and you're actually able to volunteer, sitting in front of the minister at one of the events saying, you realise with this, the tax that we have to pay, if I want to work in a community legal centre, maybe I want to have time off and have a kid, I will never pay my HECS debt off. This is what it means. Privatisation of universities doesn't just mean we carry around a debt for the rest of our lives. It is an attack on our ability to live in civil society and to do those things that make us strong, but do not cost money. And this is why it is so fantastic that you're all out here today. Our numbers are smaller, students have to work so much harder than they used to survive and live in the inner city. We fight that fight too, but I'm so proud to be standing with you here today, proud to be standing here for the Greens, and we will continue to fight with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll wrap things up there, guys. Thanks everyone for coming again. How about we finish up with a chant? We're going to beat back Temple's tax. We're going to beat back on Temple's tax. We're going to beat back Temple's tax. We're going to beat back on Temple's tax. We're going to